Hey everybody, welcome to watercolorguru.org. I'm Anthony, your instructor, and I've got my awesome assistant Max with me. Say hello, Max.
Hey everybody. So Anthony, what are we doing today?
We are going to paint some flowers today, Max.
Exciting.
Yep, so since this is for a Watercolor Society of North Carolina demonstration for a class, I was asked to keep it in real time. So there'll be no time lapse here. We've not really cut anything out, so you guys will get to see the pure, unadulterated footage. So getting started here with the drawing, of course, I'm beginning with what we call the envelope method. And essentially what I'm doing is I want to find where the outermost extremes of the shapes are. So you guys can see it doesn't really look like flowers, it's just sort of blobs. I'm just trying to find where everything is going to go on the page at this point.
Exciting. So at this point, how important is detail to you?
Not important at all.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are going to get to the detail, and as a matter of fact, I do like to get pretty detailed with my pencil drawings.
Okay.
But at this point, what I want to make sure is I don't just run out of room in my drawing stage.
Gotcha.
You know, I don't want to get too detailed too fast and then find that I'm off track. So you just start as simple and as light as possible with your mark making. And then at this point, now that I've got everything placed and designed, now I'm beginning to break those big envelopes down into some smaller envelopes.
Okay.
One for each petal, roughly speaking.
Ah, okay.
Still not quite the final shapes and curves and contours. We're still keeping it sort of rough and a little bit more blocky than it will finally be. But hopefully you can all see that we're working our way toward the final shapes.
And what do you mean by contours?
Contour, that's just the technical term for outlines.
Okay.
Yep. So, just a little bit of art jargon.
Vocabulary words.
And one thing I want you guys to note here, as you can see, the actual painting, I wanted to be a little bit more horizontal than it is vertical, wider than it is tall. But my reference is a little bit taller than it is wide.
It's true.
It's the wrong aspect ratio. So what I did was I just took some of those flowers, the smaller ones that are kind of hanging out in the back, and I just shifted them to the right to fill up that space a little bit more efficiently. And we're making adjustments. Guys, this video is 2 hours long. There's going to be some pauses where Max and I are not saying much, if only because we'll lose our voices if we try to talk the whole time. So, you know, maybe kick back, you know, grab some coffee, order yourself a pizza, get some alcohol. I don't know. What do people do? You could
paint along, maybe.
Paint along, yeah. You could do that. You could, I don't know, make dinner while you're watching it. You're in for the long haul, is what I'm saying.
Exactly.
And for those of you who make it all the way through, congratulations in advance.
Very exciting. So, kind of branching off from what you're doing right now, we've discussed the drawing phase, which we're in right now. What kind of drew you to this photo, this reference you've got?
You know, I like the design of it. I like that there's a very strong, large flower and then some other smaller flowers to counterbalance that.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty pleasing. It's a little bit too yellow and warm for my taste.
Okay.
So you all see that I definitely dial that down a little bit by the end.
Gotcha.
But yeah, you know, I was asked to do a flower, and my dad is big into gardening. He's got a green thumb, as you know. And so I just said, hey, Pop, do you have any photos of flowers that I can use? And he sent me about 20 of them, and this is my favorite one.
Yeah. No, that's exciting. Because sometimes you can draw. You can pull a lot more from your reference than just what's in it. So if you can find something that inspires you there, it's nice.
Yeah, it's definitely possible to shift things around and work on the design a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, if we're talking about photorealism, then you want to keep that to a minimum. Because the further you drift from reality, the more obvious that drifting will become.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
That does make a lot of sense. Yeah.
So depending on what you're going for, it could be just a really nice, you know, artistic interpretation, or it could be something more dedicated to realism.
Right. And where do you fall on that spectrum?
You know, I'd like to be artistic interpretation guy, but I think ultimately I am dedication to realism guy.
Yeah.
And, most of the paintings that I've done that people have said, wow, this is really nice, have been especially portraits that I stuck to the reference a little bit more.
Yeah.
You never want to be a slave to the reference.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain tricks that you can do to remove yourself from it by a step. So, for instance, if you're too stuck on the color, I suggest that you all take your reference and convert it to black and white.
Ah, okay.
And that will give you some more freedom to work with the color.
Very nice.
But that being said, when I'm doing, again, portrait as an example, and I'm putting lots of things like the blue of the sky reflecting off the skin, those things I'll see in the reference, and that will really punch up the realism quite a bit, and that gets a good result from people.
Yeah.
It gets good reviews, as it were.
Yeah.
Not that I'm incredibly realistic or good in any way. There's definitely artists who are far more photorealistic than I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, and in my own experience as well, typically when you're spending time and working to perfect your skills as far as realism is concerned, getting things accurate to the reference, you can then deviate from that slightly and be a little bit more loose with your interpretation of the reference. But kind of going the other way and only working loose and never really learning how to copy a reference or draw things from it, that can get you into trouble.
Yeah. And speaking of that, so we are kind of moving into the detail phase of this drawing.
Okay.
So as you can all see, I'm putting my new, more correct lines over my old sort of rough ones. And now I'm taking a kneadable eraser and I can erase away my guidelines.
Gotcha.
I do recommend a kneadable eraser instead of like a rubber eraser.
Why would you say that?
Because watercolor paper is sort of delicate.
Okay.
And what can happen is if you use a rubber eraser, you can actually damage the fibers of the paper and make them sort of stick straight up and collect more pigment. And that will make like an ugly dark streak in your paint.
Yeah.
So kneadable eraser, start light so you don't have to rub it too much. And, at this point I'm really spending a lot of time looking back and forth between my drawing and my reference.
Okay.
Trying to get it as perfect as I can.
And I know this is kind of an important thing to you as well. These lines that you're drawing now that are eventually going to play into how you paint the piece, are you worried about them being too dark, or are you going to go back and darken them? How are we going to approach that?
So I'm going to try to make sure these are pretty dark just for the sake of this being on video.
Okay.
And it all shows up a lot better if the lines are darker. I am not really concerned about the lines showing through in the final painting.
Why's that?
Because to me, the line drawing, the pencil drawing, is part of the piece.
Okay.
If I were to take a guess, it might be because I've got some background in pen and ink in watercolor.
Okay.
Doing pen drawings and then watercolor over it. In fact, that's how I started with watercolor. So to me, that's just part of the artistic effect of it. I don't feel the need to hide the pencil that much.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I'm doing real fast, I want you guys to know, I just added some more contour lines that are following the form of the petal. And there's a couple benefits to that. One is, with flowers specifically, they're very noticeable in the form of those striations across the surface. And that helps make it look more flowery. But even if you're drawing like a person, adding those cross contour lines that wrap around the form of the object is a good habit.
Yeah. Because
that just helps you decipher the three-dimensional form and the perspective of it in your own brain. And that's definitely an exercise that we have students do.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
So flowers are just kind of nice because they actually end up showing up in the final thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And another thing to note, you all may have noticed I actually did a little bit of shading. And I just do that to sort of help myself. Personally, I like to get as much of the hard work of the whole process done in the drawing as possible.
Okay.
That's when it's easiest to make changes with the pencil. You can just erase it. And personally, I just feel really comfortable with the pencil and doing it that way.
Yeah.
Better to do the hard stuff up front. So once again, refining that edge. And don't rush this step. Take your time, people. Get it right.
Yeah. I think that's a lovely idea.
Doing it right. I think so too.
Yep. How profound was that? No. The drawing stage, being at the beginning of the process, right? Getting this stage as accurate as possible moving forward is so vitally important, because if your drawing isn't correct, then your painting most definitely cannot be correct. So trying to stay as close to that line as possible is I think really important.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think what you just said is kind of profound. If your drawing is not correct, then your painting will definitely not be correct.
Yeah. I mean, there are people out there, no doubt, who have learned to work without an initial drawing and create phenomenal pieces. But this is the process here. This is the process that is able to be taught, and that makes the most sense too.
Yeah, probably not in watercolor. I don't think I know anybody that can go into watercolor without any kind of plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless you're just doing something so loose and gestural. Yeah.
It's true, yeah.
I've seen people do like figure drawing, like gestures in watercolor, but yeah, it comes out so abstracted.
Yeah.
So here I am darkening some of the outlines like we talked about.
Yeah, they're very visible here.
Yeah, just because I want you guys to be able to see.
Mm-hmm. And to quickly speak on the production here, we actually have 3 camera angles. Right now you've been able to see 2, the overhead and now the close-up. Later on when we get to the painting, that box in the bottom right-hand corner will become our palette view, so you can see the colors we're mixing.
Yep, we don't want you guys to miss any of the action.
Mm-mm.
The different camera angles are one of the things that we talked about when we first started making Watercolor Guru videos.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of thought to ourselves, like, okay, as people who are also students of art and watch videos to learn, what kind of things do we want to see?
Yeah.
And one of my things was, I want to see the palette.
Yeah. Because
a lot of painting videos don't show the palette, and I think that that's really essential. I also want to see the reference. I want to be able to compare what the person's working from with what they're doing.
It's true, yeah.
So we sort of figured out this way. Actually, Max figured this out in Premiere, so credit where credit's due. This way to kind of stack the videos all in the same display.
Yeah.
And I think it's been really powerful.
No, it really has. We produced quite a few videos this way. Some are available on YouTube, others on some sites for purchase.
We'll get to that.
So moving back into what's going on right here. At this point, how far into the drawing process are you?
More than halfway for sure.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, I've got certain things up to a certain level of detail and fidelity, and I want to get the whole drawing up to that point.
Yeah.
I want to reinforce those lines and get all those curves and contours in there. And if I may make a quick drawing tip, a lot of drawing for watercolor has to do with your line weight. And there's a couple things you can do. Obviously, your more important things will have a heavier, darker line.
Yep.
Another good trick is you can make the lines a little bit heavier where they butt up against each other. So you can see there's a lot of things in here where a line will be going and then it gets interrupted by a perpendicular line.
Yeah.
By something in front of it. And there's a lot of that in flowers, lots of overlapping things. And so anywhere that there's like an overlap like that, you can darken those lines. Just make it really nice and clean, and it reads really well. And at this point, I believe, I've already kind of forgotten, but I believe I started this drawing with a much looser grip on the pencil. And that's good for blocking things in. I definitely recommend you start that way. If you sort of keep it loose and draw with your shoulder, you'll have more range of motion and be able to draw more comfortably. At this point, I'm working in these very fine details, and I've switched to just a writing grip.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the same grip that you've all used since you were 5 and you learned how to write. And, my fingers are close to the tip of the pencil, and it's comfortable, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, for this level of detail. Once again, erasing those stray marks.
Now, do you have any tips on how people can practice what you've been talking about here as far as the envelope method is concerned, detail, and now line weights? What's the best way to practice this?
Of course, the best way to practice drawing is by drawing. So I think ultimately everyone's goal, if they want to draw and paint realistically, should be to be able to draw and paint figures and portraits, because those are so much more difficult than a flower, and requires so many more skills and so much more nuanced understanding of drawing technique.
Yeah.
That if you learn that and then you come back to this, you'll say, oh, this is a breeze. As far as practicing the overall process of watercolor painting, you just got to do a lot of painting. And my recommendation is keep your painting small.
Small.
Yeah, because you want to practice that whole process from start to finish and be able to iterate and improve your process very quickly.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, 100 small paintings is going to teach you more than 2 very large ones.
Mm-hmm.
Reserve your huge, monumental Renaissance style.
I had to learn that the hard way. I did.
Yeah, reserve those Sistine Chapel type paintings for, when you've already sort of mastered all these skills.
Yeah.
And by the way, everybody, this is not scripted. Max has not told me what questions he's going to throw at me during this segment. So he's just asking me stuff, and I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, the trivia round's up next. Daily Double, I think, will be our next questions here.
I don't think I'm supposed to know ahead of time that it's the Daily Double.
I obviously don't know what I'm talking about. Just kind of talking about it as it comes, because ultimately there's a lot of information that gets covered here. So
real fast, that's back to my my overhand grip with the pencil.
Oh yeah, I can see it.
Not a writing grip anymore. It's much looser. I'm using more the side of the pencil instead of the tip.
And that's just to keep it, just for keeping it loose, or?
It disables your fingers and your wrist and forces you to draw with your shoulder.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so for getting things started or for drawing anything large, it's a better bet than the writing grip.
Gotcha.
For sure.
Now moving back into the center.
Yep. That's kind of like a little dead petal. I left it in there. It's an interesting detail. I don't know, I just find these shapes really appealing. There's something sort of alien about them.
About flowers?
Yeah, I mean, just look at them. I don't know.
Yes, I see
never
aliens,
mind.
yes.
Alright, forget it. Forget I said anything. I'll just not say anything for the rest of the whole video.
No, I see it too.
So, still darkening. Sorry to be so repetitive.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to shore up those lines.
Yeah, you talk about uniformity a lot as far as your line weight goes in this drawing phase.
Uniformity in terms of the level of detail, not necessarily the line weight.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, because there's gonna be some more delicate lines, such as the cross contour lines inside the petal.
Yeah, which is significantly lighter.
And then anywhere that there's going to be an edge between a light tone and a dark tone, I want those lines to be pretty bold.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I wanna keep those separate for sure.
Yeah, because essentially, just as this is the foundation for the painting itself, it's also allowing you to kind of plan ahead as far as how you're going to approach those light and dark shapes. Obviously, you've got some very important areas where the background is going to play very heavily with the foreground. There's some more hatching there with the graphite.
Yeah, and we kind of blew it with the camera placement because the bottom of that flower gets cut off. So unfortunately, we missed a little bit of that work just now, and in a few other places, but hopefully it's not too bad. And thank you all for watching so far. Just want to take a quick break and show you the trailer for our Udemy course, Paint Realistic Watercolor Portraits. This course does feature a full demonstration and shows the entire process for how to paint portraits in watercolor.
And if you want to access that course on Udemy, you can just follow the link in the description for this video. It'll take you right to it where you can see the details for the course.
Welcome to watercolorguru.org. I'm Anthony, your instructor.
And I'm Max, the assistant. And we are very happy to have you join us on this course that focuses on how to draw and paint portraits in watercolor.
This course features a full demonstration. We begin with how to choose and edit photos as a reference. Then we talk about how to draw the head accurately. We move into adding masking fluid, doing the underpainting, adding the modeling of the features, and then finally the finishing touches.
And we went all out with this course. We have 3 camera angles, 1 overhead, 1 close-up, and 1 for the palette. And we do step-by-step narration throughout the course.
So we're so excited to have you, and we'll catch you in the next video.
I love that trailer so much.
Me too.
All right, what's going on now?
So it's finally time to start adding some paint. So I just took my water spray bottle and went ahead and sprayed my paints down. So and now I'm going to mix up my colors.
Okay. What colors are we using here?
That is cerulean blue, which I highly recommend. Good sky blue.
Okay.
I'm using my 1/2-inch flat brush. This is cadmium yellow. Nice thing about cadmium yellow, it's really vibrant. It's also quite opaque. So it's a pretty thick color, and it sits on top of the paper quite nicely.
Okay.
And that's some cadmium red. Obviously, the two together make orange. And go ahead and wash that brush off. Don't want to pollute my colors too much. And here is some Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray is sort of a nice, generic, dark. It's more blue than gray, really, but it's multi-purpose.
So at this stage, you have already, and I notice here you're going to use some clean water. What's going on here?
So I'm grabbing my large oval mop brush and soaking that with water.
Okay.
And man, this thing holds a lot of water. And now I'm just laying down a deluge on this paper.
What's the purpose for this?
I'm going to do a wet into wet underpainting.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, man.
What is wet into wet?
So before I talk about that, what I just did was I squeezed the excess water out of the brush.
Okay.
And now I'm using it to soak up whatever water is in excess on the paper.
Gotcha.
So because you want a nice even film. So now I've grabbed my yellow and I am painting it on my wet paper. And so wet into wet means exactly that. It's wet paint onto wet paper.
Okay.
And the beauty of this is the pigment is going to move and shift and blend and create these nice soft edges.
Okay.
So there'll be no hard, crinkly strokes here. Everything will be nice and smooth, and the gradations will be gradual.
And this might sound like a stupid question, but why do you want that at this stage?
No, not a stupid question at all. The thing about watercolor is that you can always add a hard edge or make an edge more crisp. You cannot necessarily take a hard edge and make it softer.
Go ahead and give it one more try.
Softer. I was thinking about like the word like softening, like soften, which you don't really say the T in. Softer.
I can see where you were going with that, but I
Yeah.
think the correct word should be used. Okay. What he's trying to say is softer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I like to do is I start very, very soft,
Okay.
and only later on do I add my hard edges. If you want a more photorealistic effect, you have to realize that most edges in your perception are not in focus.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. You know, the part of your eye that's responsible for focusing is, you know, the size of the head of a pin.
Mm-hmm.
So most of what you're seeing, whether you realize it or not, is out of focus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for realism, you want to keep most of your edges very soft. And some artists will even paint with no hard edges whatsoever. Just everything's at a very slight level of blur.
Okay.
For me personally, I do like to have some crisp edges, and we will develop those as we go on.
Mm-hmm.
But this is my preferred way to start.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So what I was going to ask you earlier, when you were mixing your colors on the palette, you've already taken the time to kind of identify what colors are going to go where before you start painting. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I mean, I definitely have a plan in mind, and the mixing of the colors on the palette is definitely sort of an act of discovery.
Okay.
And figuring that part out. But you also have to have the flexibility and skill to improvise somewhat in this stage.
Okay.
So, for instance, you know, so far the petals of the flowers have been pretty solid the way that I wanted them. At this point, I'm asking myself, okay, should some of that blue bleed over into the petals and make them more transparent looking? If so, how much? And also, I remember at this exact moment I was questioning, is this the right blue? Would I have been better off with ultramarine blue?
Mm-hmm.
That was definitely on my mind. And what I just did wasn't super visible, but I realized that it was getting a little bit too dry too fast.
Yeah.
So I took my spray bottle again and I sprayed some new fresh water into it to make that painting damp again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, with these washes, it's big fun but high pressure. You have to manage the dampness level of your whole paper all at once. You have to use the right colors. You know, you have to think about what effect that's going to have in later layers. It's definitely something
there's
worth
a lot of
practicing.
improvisation here where you're trying to decide just in a split second if it's too wet, if it's not wet enough, if the value is correct, if the color's correct. That's high pressure, but definitely looks pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, to me, this is often the most fun part.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like, you know, not very many rules. You just have to follow a few simple rules.
Well, yeah, just like mixing on the palette it's an act of discovery.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I do not have to stay in the lines.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to all bleed over each other anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I've switched to Payne's Gray here, and I'm filling in that background a little bit.
Yeah.
As you can all see.
So what is with the blue in the background? Because I'm seeing a lot of green there.
You know what? The green is just the worst. Green just doesn't look good.
Okay.
And some people may disagree with me, but if any of you read, is it Color and Light by James Gurney, or is it Imaginative Realism by James Gurney? In one of his books, he has a chapter called The Green Problem, and it talks about how...
I want to say it's Color and Light.
I'm not sure. But he talks about how, for some reason, paintings that have a lot of green in them just don't look that good.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look around at landscapes, they're almost always like it's sunrise or sunset and everything's very orange. Or it's a winter landscape and there's no green. Or, you know, artists find ways, one way or another, to remove green from the painting because it's just kind of ugly. And so in this case, I did not like the green background, and I know that orange, which is, you know, the flowers are kind of orange.
Yeah.
Orange and blue are complementary colors, so I know that this will be a complementary color scheme, and therefore it will be pleasing to the eye. And yeah, we're off to the races.
Yeah.
This is a good example of where you don't have to be a slave to the reference.
He's got a blog post on it, The Green Problem. You can access it online.
Yeah, so everybody look up. James Gurney is an illustrator. He created the Dinotopia series. Highly recommend everything written by him. His blog, Gurney Journey, has taught me an enormous amount. So if you look up the green problem, James Gurney, you'll be able to read about that phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it should be just a matter of subjective taste, but as with physical beauty of people, yeah, it may be in the eye of the beholder, but everyone sort of agrees. You know, like it's not really, there's not really that much variation. Everyone's sort of on the same page.
Yeah.
You know, for some reason we don't like green
As much.
people.
Green people.
No, just kidding.
I don't know, man. You might be kind of fringe there.
Okay. So what I'm doing here is I've got a stiff acrylic filbert style brush.
Okay.
And I am just making it damp but not really wet, and then I'm sucking some of the pigment off of the paper.
Ah. What is the purpose of this?
So this is called lifting, and the purpose of this is that my underpainting just got a little bit too dark in a few places, and I want to preserve the lights for later. Because with watercolor, you can always make it darker, you can't always make it lighter.
That's another good one.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to make something lighter. You can lift, but it's easier to do this while the painting is still wet.
Which it is.
Which it is, yeah. It has not had time to dry yet.
Yeah.
So
it feels like there's a lot of those scenarios in watercolor. You can go this direction, but you cannot go the opposite direction, right?
Yeah, and that's been kind of a hurdle in teaching it, because I've had students say like, I can't get this. There's so many all these little rules. You know, you gotta, keep it soft and keep it light and work negatively and work foreground to background, like all these different things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, yeah, this ain't oil painting, you know.
Ooh.
With and hey, I love oil painting.
I was gonna say shots fired. There's a lot.
No, I mean, you know that I also paint in oil.
Yes, yeah.
And I love it, and it's also got its own challenges.
Yep.
But watercolor really does have some rules.
Yeah.
Or rather, some
There's
principles.
a lot more sensitivity in watercolor, I would say, than in oil painting.
Sensitivity?
As in, good mirror. Well, yeah, no, your painting is very sensitive to the elements and to the technique. So you have to really walk a very fine line if you want to achieve a specific effect. In oil, you do have the ability to cover over your mistakes very easily. Not saying, once again, that oil's easy by no stretch of one's imagination.
Watercolor is less forgiving.
Less forgiving.
Yeah. So just so you guys know, we just experienced a pretty substantial time jump. I finished the underpainting phase, and then we let it dry. So the paper is now, totally bone dry, warm to the touch. And you may notice it looks significantly lighter than it did before.
It does.
And that's because watercolor gets lighter as it dries. So getting toward the ending of the painting, it's usually okay to paint a little bit darker than you think you need to, because it's going to get lighter. And now we're going to begin on the actual work of painting the petals. So my method for this is essentially I'm taking a clean, damp brush.
Okay.
And I'm spreading a thin layer of water over just one petal. And it's really not much water. And then I'm going to take my color and I'm going to start working into that. And it's the same effect as the wet into wet underpainting. It's just that because it's so much less water, it's more like you could call it like damp or moist.
Yeah. Rather
than truly wet.
Okay.
Because of that, even though my strokes will soften, they won't move very much. Okay. They'll still stay pretty controlled, which is perfect for petal or flower petals when you've got all these like folds and undulations that you want to be soft, but you don't really want them to be sloppy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
you also are given those kind of little boxes to work in. Those petals are together, but also separate, so you can spend. You're not stretched thin here at this time. You can kind of focus on each one as an individual petal.
Yeah, the edges of each petal are sort of a very convenient stopping place for each wash. Yeah, like you said, a little container. So quick note about the colors I'm using. You all may notice on my palette there I've sort of got like this green and then this blue and then a little bit of orange I've got mixed in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of mixing between those.
Yeah, so if you look at the reference, it's pretty much right. It's this sort of shadow color mixed out of all the colors that are there. It's sort of an olivey green, which is, like a darker version of the yellow.
Yeah.
And it's warm, so there's some red in there, but it's also blue.
Yeah.
And what you get is this mud. But as long as it's got those sort of greens and oranges appearing in it,
yeah,
it is right.
That I think is a really important point to talk about, because I've seen this so many times when there are shadows in one's painting. It's so easy to just want to put a darker value or color there, when in reality, if you don't draw from the colors that are in the rest of the piece, it's not going to fit. It's not going to match it at all.
Yeah, I mean, never forget that you're not painting a flower. You're painting light. If there were no light, this would just be all a black hole. So you have to understand that a shadow is a darker version of the local color. Local color is the term for the actual color of the object.
Okay.
But it is also has some of the surrounding colors reflected into it.
Yeah.
Which are also there in the lights, but they're more visible in the shadows.
That's why
there's less interrupting it.
Yeah. I guess that's why you're having part of your underpainting from the background bleed into it, is because that's the way it is in the reference too.
So that underpainting creates a foundation for me.
Yeah.
And what I'm doing right now, you guys should be able to see really clearly what I'm talking about with the softening of those strokes. They're still staying where they are. They're not really moving, but they are soft.
Yeah.
Except for those up top, I realized I didn't wet a large enough area, so I'm sort of softening those out.
Nice.
Best to catch mistakes like that and fix them mid-wash.
Mid-wash.
Rather than try to fix them later on when it's dry.
That's true.
Yeah, it'll never be as easy again.
It is fun to see it just kind of transform before your eyes here as the viewer,
Yeah, that sort of speaks to an aspect of watercolor that I like. It's kind of good for demonstration because the process itself becomes almost an art form. Like you wouldn't, but you could almost stop at any given moment and say, okay, that's the piece.
Yeah. Because
it's sort of beautiful at every stage.
Yeah.
With some notable exceptions, but yeah, you're right. It's fun to sort of pull those shadows and those more vibrant colors out of what's already there.
Well, yeah, because at this stage you're working with the fundamentals and the techniques that you developed over time, and at the same point you're also leaving yourself open to the variation that comes with all these different elements, right? The water, the levels of humidity in the room, they can all contribute to how the piece turns out. So kind of watching that effect, I know I've seen you work before. Sometimes it'll be a little bit too dry and you're having to deal with that, and your piece comes out differently because of the conditions, and then sometimes you have to work in an opposite way. So it's interesting to see, for sure.
Oh, it's true. Yeah, that humidity thing has been a major challenge. At certain moments.
I just heard you painting. Well, I watched you painting, and then you out of the. And just in the background, I'll walk away and I'll hear you just yelling about how dry or how wet something is.
You don't believe me? It makes a significant difference.
No, it's great. It's great.
Because mastering this, as with any skill, is reaching a level of unconscious competence. Where your brain is able to almost subconsciously predict what the paint is going to do before it does it. I mean, that would really be the ideal, consummate skill, right? But if you are in a place where the humidity is lower and everything is drying by a factor faster than what you're used to, you're just like, dropping boxes.
Dropping the boxes.
Everything is just getting away from you. Like you're working in this area and this one's drying when you need it to still be wet. And all of a sudden your strokes are more streaky. Yeah. And it just creates a mess.
Well, back to the art form, right? The process being, what's going on here? So that's quick jump ahead.
That is a hairdryer. So that I use if I want to speed up the drying process, as you all know, watercolor can take, 20, 30 minutes to dry. Or if it's really wet, like with the underpainting, you might have to wait an hour or more.
Mm-hmm.
The hairdryer, just blow some warm air on it. It'll help it evaporate. I recommend you try to wait to do that until the shine is gone.
Okay.
Because while the paper is still shiny with water,
okay,
at that point the pigment is still moving around.
I see.
Potentially even just microscopically, but it is still moving. You don't want to interrupt that process prematurely.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then also, just quick hairdryer tips. As with hair, you don't want to hold it in one spot. You want to keep it moving. That way you don't burn the paper on accident.
Okay.
If you have any sort of masking fluid on the paper, which I don't recommend, but if you did, you definitely don't want to use hot air for the blow dryer because the heat will make the masking fluid become one with the paper.
Okay, they'll bind.
Yeah, and then you can't get them apart. So use the hairdryer to speed it up. Don't use it with masking fluid. Don't hold it in one place. Don't light your paper on fire.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. Don't make it combust. And you'll be good.
Yeah, so you didn't use masking fluid on this piece. What was your reasoning behind that decision?
I hate masking fluid.
I already knew the answer.
No, I mean, to be fair, there's not really a logical place with this reference that you need it.
It's true, yeah. There's not really a true highlight. I mean, there are some areas that are lighter, no doubt, but there's not an area of true white.
You can keep it all pretty soft, and, like with a face, you might want to use masking fluid for the catch light on the eyes or reflection on the glasses, as in the case of our Udemy course, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But I'd say use it sparingly. In this case, like you said, there's no really clear-cut, crystal clear white spots.
Yeah.
So I didn't need it.
Makes a lot of sense.
And I rejoiced. For most people, and even for myself most of the time, masking fluid creates more problems than it solves.
Yeah.
So, not a fan.
So just back to the process here. You're continuing to wet individual petals, or those that are grouped together, and then going back over and adding your colors to them, correct?
That's pretty much the process. And, you guys, hope you're all down to, watch another hour of this, because that's pretty much what's going to be happening.
Yeah.
But, on the other hand, this doesn't really take that long. I mean, look how much progress I've already made in, like, the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Truth be told, not to pick on oil painting again, but doing this in a more opaque medium, like oil or gouache, what I would have to do is actually mix up the color for each patch, as it were, individually, and then lay them down and blend them together, and it would take forever.
It would.
Yeah. I would estimate that this painting, which took 2 hours in total, as an oil painting would probably take no less than 10.
It is a huge time difference.
Yeah, and the result would be beautiful.
Yeah.
Probably very worth it and very satisfying.
Well, yeah, the con of the dry time in watercolor can also become a benefit within itself, because you are able to move much quicker because of it. Whereas in oils, if you were going to have to wait for something to set over time to go back over it, it would take a lot longer.
I mean, that's all part of the story of how I got into watercolor. I was in high school, and I was in an art school, and we had all these assignments, and I wanted to find something that I could knock out a lot of pieces really fast.
Yeah,
I had to. And so watercolor is easy to set up. It's easy to clean up. The materials are not that expensive. You can produce pretty quickly, and it's just fast.
Yeah,
I like that. Good for teaching too. We there's a studio I teach at, the Ann Kiefer Studio in Greensboro, and we usually start students in color with watercolor, because you're just doing so much mixing of color all the time, and it's so fast and so easy to experiment that you learn color theory much faster than you do with other mediums.
And I don't know about most people, but I feel like most children, at least those I grew up with, and myself included, even before I started working with working on my own artwork, I just remember being in like school and pulling out a kit of watercolors, the Crayola, whatever, 10 colors, right?
Yeah.
Obviously not creating anything close to this.
Oh, really?
But...
With the Crayolas? I would have figured you could have matched this. No problem.
Oh, yeah, no, it was just a little bit different.
With the 50 color Crayola set that cost less than 1 tube of this paint.
But yeah, no. We were able to experiment with it, just even as kids, primarily because of how quick it was to clean up. That was a huge factor. That.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine you're an elementary school teacher.
I can't imagine giving
30 students
them oils to work with.
Absolutely not. Yeah, no, you'd have 30 like lead poisoned children in like a week.
It's not something to laugh at, but yes, continue.
Why not? I didn't say there were any lead poisoned children. It was just a hypothetical.
This thought experiment. Okay.
A friend of mine did get poisoned by oil paints when I was in high school. Actually,
I've heard about that. Yeah.
But anyway, we digress.
We really are promoting watercolor. There's a lot of propaganda here against oil paint.
No, I mean this is for the Watercolor Society of North Carolina, so we don't really have to sell it to the people watching this. And we both
everybody
love
here
oil
knows.
painting.
Yes, everybody here knows the virtues of watercolor.
Yes, they all know that, and you and I both paint in oils also.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just the objective pros and cons. But maybe we can talk about the materials that we're using.
Yeah.
Okay.
What materials are you using? Let's start with the brushes. Okay. Everybody always wants to know about the brushes.
For some reason, yeah, even though that's the least important part.
I know. What is the most important part? Let's start with that then.
Paper.
Why paper?
Paper is the foundation of everything that you're doing. Every stroke that you make is interacting with the paper. Which should be a given, but for some reason, this is the thing that everyone wants to go cheap on. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I've told my students, before classes, buy some 140-pound Arches cold pressed paper, and they'll come in, and I'll be like, "Did you buy your Arches 140-pound cold pressed paper?"
Wait, let me play the student here. Well, no, but I found this great paper at Walmart.
Why did you buy your paper at Walmart?
Well, I had to get my groceries, and I just thought it would. It's printer paper, basically.
Oh my god, you're making me uncomfortable, even in this fake scenario. But seriously, like one person, I don't know if this person is going to be on this video, so I'm sorry if I'm calling you out. But one person,
it's me. It's just me.
No, it wasn't me. One person found at a used art supply store this paper from the 50s. Mm-hmm. It was this old pad of paper that was yellowed and hadn't been used, and they're like, "Well, this says cold pressed." Yeah. And I'm like, "It's not the same." Yeah. And I've had so many students just flat out refuse to buy the paper that I'm telling them to buy. Mm-hmm. And they're struggling, and they're trying to do the exact thing that I'm showing them how to do. Yeah. And they're like, "Why isn't this working?" And I'm like, "Well, let me try it." Yeah. And I tried on their paper, and I can't even make it do what I just did on my own paper. Yeah. And I'm like, "It's not you, it's the paper." Yeah. If you are watching something on the Food Network and it's how to make some glazed chicken or something. Yeah. And you say, "You know what? I'm going to try that, but instead of chicken, I'm going to use a raw pumpkin." It's not going to taste the same. Why do people keep thinking that they can use a different kind of paper and get the same result?
Well, so this is also no criticism of the desire to spend your money wisely on your materials. It just truly is that the paper is that important.
See, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No. But that is to your credit. Obviously, working with this kind of paper, and knowing what works and what doesn't work. The paper is just that important.
And I would argue, don't worry about spending money wisely on your materials.
Okay.
Always buy the best materials that you can afford.
Yeah.
And if you're taking an art lesson, especially people who've taken art lessons with me in person, then I'm assuming that you have enough, material, financial ability to where you can drop, $25 buying a block of watercolor paper.
Yeah.
And it'll have 20 sheets on it.
Yep.
You can go to, Jerry's Artorama and get it, and it's not that expensive, and it'll last you like a year, and your paintings will improve instantly.
Yeah.
If you do that.
Yeah. I guess to correct what I said, spending your money wisely, start with the paper.
Yeah. So paper is the most important thing. If you buy cheap paints but have good paper, you can get a decent result if you know what you're doing. If you buy cheap brushes, you will run into some struggle and you'll probably get some bristles in your paint, but that's not the end of the world. Even with cheap brushes, you can still get a good result if you have good paper.
Yeah.
But if you buy bad paper, nothing can save you.
Nothing can save you.
God save you. So for those of you who haven't picked up on it, I do recommend Arch's 140 pound or 300 pound cold pressed. They also have cold pressed rough as a sort of subcategory of that, and it's got more of a tooth to it. And sometimes I use that, sometimes I don't. It doesn't really matter. So cold pressed rough, and your paper has to be stretched in some form or another. In this case, I'm on a watercolor block.
Okay.
Which is a device that essentially takes 20 or so sheets of watercolor paper and it glues them all together at the edge so they're all stretched.
Okay.
And when you're done with a piece, all you have to do is take a knife, run it underneath the edge, and peel off the paper, and then you've got a perfectly clean sheet to work on.
Underneath. Wow, that's nice.
Yeah, you cannot beat that for convenience. And the smaller versions are not that expensive. The bigger ones are pricier.
Yeah.
Alternately, you can take just a sheet of paper, a loose sheet.
Okay.
And you can stretch it. So
how do you do that?
Yeah, without going to a whole explanation, essentially what you do is you take a piece of either plywood or what's called gator board, which is a very thick, strong foam board.
Okay.
And you soak the paper completely from both sides. In fact, some artists will even do this in their sink or in a bathtub.
Makes sense.
So you just get it totally soaked through, put it on your board, and then staple around the edge every 2 inches or so.
Okay.
Same principle. If the edges can't move, then there's no give in the paper, and that way it can't warp and buckle and bubble up.
Gotcha. And that would eventually affect how your piece turns out if you've got that warping.
Yeah, because if you've got all these bubbles, you're gonna have valleys and troughs, and the paint is gonna settle into it.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get these big dark spots.
Yeah, where there's not supposed to be.
Yeah. So, again, don't cut corners here, guys. Take the 5 minutes it takes to either stretch the paper or spend a couple extra bucks on the block.
Yep.
And you won't have to worry about the paper buckling, and it will improve your work. Buy the good stuff. Take the extra time. This is all part of the craft. You're not going to cut corners if you're a carpenter or a builder or a blacksmith or a glass blower. Don't cut corners as a painter.
Yeah.
So that's paper.
Okay.
Again. 140 or 300 pound cold pressed.
Gotcha. Let's move on to brushes.
Why not? Brushes don't really matter that much. What's more important is the shape of them. So let's talk about that for a minute. Obviously, you've got round brushes.
Okay.
So those will come to a taper. Those are really good for curved edges and little detailed points. Flat brushes are just like a rectangular tip. Those are great for corners, architectural designs, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, a flat brush is more versatile because a flat brush, you can use the corner of it and make a curved edge. With a round brush, you cannot make a corner as easily.
Yeah, that's true.
And then there's some specialty brushes. You've got your rigger brushes, are long, pointy brushes. I use one later on for the signature here.
Okay.
Great for tree branches and details like that. A mop brush is just like a big...
That's the one you use at the beginning, right?
Yeah, it looks almost like a makeup brush for blush. It's just a big mop.
Yeah. Just
holds a lot of water. And I've used a couple times in here a hake brush, and I'll use that again in the future. And that's a big, soft brush, Japanese brush that you can keep dry and use to blend your paint.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, so a couple different types of brushes. I really like Princeton brushes. I find those are pretty high quality and they've lasted a long time. Some of these brushes I used in high school that I'm using here, and I'm not a young person, so those brushes are about a decade old now. So
Decade old. Wow.
Yeah, it's brutal. And they've held together just fine.
Yeah.
So
now paints.
I recommend M. Graham and Company.
Okay.
Yep, that is the paint that Mary White uses, who is one of the best and most renowned watercolorists in the world. And if they're good enough for Mary White, they're probably good enough for you too. They are built with, or they're manufactured with honey in them, which actually helps to preserve them and keep them fresh a lot longer. If you just add a little bit of water, like I did at the beginning of this process with your spray bottle, they will reanimate and be nice and juicy to work with. And they're also just really nice, smooth, vibrant colors as well. Paints will probably ultimately be the most expensive part of your toolkit, because a good tube of watercolor paint is, $10 to $15 depending on the color, and you'll need 10 of them to have a decently well-rounded palette, and you'll have to replace them every couple months if you're painting regularly. So that's the razor and blade model. So that's paper, brushes, paints. I use a two-sided bucket for the water, but honestly any container will do just fine. Palette should be white plastic like what you see here. If you use any staining colors, like I've got phthalo blue on the palette, if you use that, I recommend getting a second palette just for those colors, because the paint will stain your white plastic and then you can't get it off. Any other materials that I'm missing you can think of?
Paper, brushes, paints, palette, bucket. Where do you source your water from?
The sink. Greensboro, North Carolina.
I wanted something more than that. I wanted you to have it shipped in from, I don't know, somewhere.
This water was shipped in from the Nile.
It's the ice. It's the Iceland. It's the water that comes out of the Icelandic moss.
It's a melting glacier because of global warming. If we ever solve that problem, I'll have to stop painting because all my water will be ice again.
I wanted you to say something like, "It's the tears of my enemies," or your own tears while creating these pieces.
It's their tears after I crush their hopes and dreams. No, it's just out of the sink. Yeah. And people have asked me like, "Oh, does it matter if it's like distilled water or out of the tap, or if it's warm or cold?" Nope, doesn't matter at all. It's just water. I do like having the two compartments in that bucket side by side, because what I can do, practical. What I can do is when I need a little bit extra water, like while I'm mixing color like this, I can just quickly dip it in the dirty side, like that, and I don't have to worry about it. And then when I need clean water for a wash, then I can take out of the clean side.
Got it right there. Yeah,
I've got it right there. So not absolutely required, but again, it's these little things that will take your painting up to the next level.
Yeah. Well, I think speaking more generally here, obviously learning the specific techniques for watercolor is extremely important, probably more important, but dealing with all of the different materials you're using, like anything you can do to step your craft up from one level to the next, you should do if you're able to. And so speaking about the materials, right, getting the best ones for your work is incredibly important, because you are going to be limited by them eventually,
So I want to get back to the concept that you just said, but let me talk about what I just did.
Okay.
In the demo.
Laying down some green there.
So I laid down a dark green right up against the edge of the flower.
Okay.
And then I took a lighter green and I laid that against the edge of the darker green. And then I took some clean water and I'm using that to pull out the pigment of the lighter green.
Yeah. And
that's the best way I can describe it. I am actually pulling that pigment, those molecules of color, out from the inside.
Yeah.
And I'm creating that nice soft transition. And this is ultimately something that's going to be repeated constantly in watercolor.
Okay.
You lay down a tone, and then you soften the edge and pull that pigment out and make it that transition.
Gotcha.
In this case, I'm laying down that green first for the leaves and the stem of the flower of the plant. And now I'm doing a little bit with the dead leaf right there. It's, transitioned to brown, obviously. And then, once that's all in there and it's nice and soft, I'm going to cut off the edges of that with my dark background.
Ah, okay.
So I don't really have to put in my hard edges now. I don't have to stay within the lines, as it were.
Gotcha.
I just need the colors there.
So you're thinking a few steps ahead here.
Exactly. I will create those shapes negatively in a few minutes.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense now.
Yep. And so, getting back to what we were talking about a minute ago, I want to talk about a concept that's been very important for me. So this is a Japanese phrase. It means continuous improvement.
Okay.
And the expression is kaizen.
Kaizen.
So kaizen, continuous improvement. The idea is, this is mostly used in business, but it applies in every part of your life, that the process of improvement should be gradual, and you should seek to improve every aspect of what you're doing all the time. And never at any point do you say, okay, this is good enough. You always, always, always seek to improve incrementally. You always experiment and try new things and say, maybe this could make me 1% better. And so with painting overall, like I mentioned earlier, I recommend to students that they focus on small pieces.
Yeah.
And that way you can try a lot of different things, experiment a lot, iterate a lot, and you'll get better very, very fast if you focus on just making one thing a little bit better with every painting.
Yeah.
And honestly, we have followed essentially the same process with these videos.
Yep.
Those first videos were pretty rough.
They were pretty rough. That's why you cannot find them anymore.
Yeah, it's true. Some of them are gone.
Yeah.
A lot of them are gone. We couldn't quite nail down the use of the microphone and getting the audio quality crisp, and our videos were glitching, and we weren't quite sure how to present the information. Some idiot's hair was in front of the camera the whole time. We didn't plan that, by the way. That just happened to happen at this exact moment.
Yeah, but that happened a lot.
That happened
more
a lot,
often. Yeah.
We've gotten a lot better, and then we added the palette camera.
Yeah.
And then we added the close-up camera, and we had the intro music played.
Yeah.
And each major project, we've just gotten a little faster and a little bit better. And I think we still have a long way to go.
Yeah.
But we've reached a point with these videos where it's like, okay, this is definitely legible, as it were.
Yeah.
It's watchable.
Well, and not to self-promote too much here, but being that you're on YouTube and you have access to our YouTube channel, check out some of our other videos, and definitely check out the Udemy course. I think that's probably what we're most proud of.
It is. That's been our largest scale project to date, for sure.
Yeah. It's got so much stuff in it. What else has gotten it other than the videos? It's got resources that you can use.
It's got PDFs breaking down like the perspective of heads.
Exactly.
And all kinds of supplemental information like that. And honestly, watercolor portraits and figure painting specifically was a big part of the reason that I made watercolorguru.org in the first place, because I found that there wasn't that much useful instruction online for it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hopefully rectify that. Now, of course, it turns out that people only want to see flowers. But
yeah. No, the more complex things definitely need to be touched on, and we're going to keep doing that.
And I think a lot of people run from portraits in watercolor because they are so vanishingly difficult. But I think it's worth trying. At least.
Absolutely.
So switch to the close up here, gives a better angle, and I've got my round brush. The tip of this brush is almost like a little hook, so it allows me to both stay very detailed within those lines, and then also it holds a lot of water, so I can do broader strokes if I need to. And we're working our way into the more detailed aspects of the painting. Just like with the drawing, the painting starts vague and unspecific, and works its way toward the more detailed.
kind of see it coming out here.
I must have hit the camera or something. It was shaking for a second there. And this is something that I could probably improve next time. It's technically better to make these sort of strokes long and smooth, even though that's a little bit more difficult to be accurate.
Yeah.
It'll often end up looking better if you just do one continuous thing.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely doing lots of little strokes. And in drawing, that's kind of a bad habit. You get these little frayed edges. In painting, it's kind of okay, but yeah, this probably could have been done better on my part. This is a do as I say, not as I do moment.
Well, no, it's good to touch on some of the areas where you feel you could have improved, or where you want to make improvement the next time. You know, that's a very teachable moment right there.
Yeah, and with strokes, you know, you never want to use 2 strokes when you can use 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, always use the fewest strokes as possible. Keep it simple. So if you were the student here, is there any question that you would ask at this point, or thoughts that you have?
There's a few things that I've been thinking about. Probably, what's your biggest concern at this stage? What are you trying to prevent from happening here? Might be a little bit too vague of a question. But I always feel myself, putting myself back into the role of the student here, I always feel I'm kind of concerned about making a misstep in watercolor because, as we mentioned multiple times, it's very hard to correct your mistakes, especially once it's dry. So what is your biggest concern here about moving forward?
Yeah, there's a couple of concerns that have to do with going too far. It would definitely be possible at this point to make the colors too vibrant.
Okay.
The yellow's too yellow, the orange is too orange, and ultimately it could suffer from what we call fruit salad disease.
Fruit salad? No, there's no way that was made up before this.
Yes, that's also in James Gurney's book.
Okay.
He points out that more paintings suffer from having too much color than not enough.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so again, common beginner mistake. I especially hate this when there's too much white in the painting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hideous. So it's possible to go too far with the paint. It's possible with the color, that is. It's possible to go too far with the paint physically, where you add too many layers.
And it's too opaque.
It's too opaque, and also it's possible if you really overwork something.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible to start to damage your paper.
Really? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've seen that happen before.
Yeah, I mean, if you're adding 10, 12 layers of paint, you're running the risk of your paper just starting to come apart.
No bueno.
No bueno. Yeah. So that's a concern, and then also, we're not really at this point yet, but later on, the question will begin to arise: when do I stop? When is this painting done?
Yeah.
Right. So what I've done here is I've mixed up sort of a darker green, and I'm adding the little bits on the ends of those things. You know, it's funny in the other flower video.
Yeah.
I mentioned that I should have looked up flower anatomy.
And here we are.
And here we are again. And I still didn't do it.
Yeah. Actually, speaking about the other flower video,
yeah,
also on our YouTube is a free and condensed instructional course on how to paint realistic flowers in watercolor. That right there is a great video to watch. It's basically what we're covering here, but condensed with some time lapse and a different set of flowers.
Yep, and some of you may have already seen that. That's actually one of our more popular YouTube videos.
Yep.
Albeit still hasn't really gotten that much traction, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
So if you watch that video and you like it, feel free to email it or text it to your friends.
Yeah.
And share it with them.
Please do.
So now we're going to move into the background. And the core color for this background is going to be Payne's Gray. As you guys can see, I've cleared off a section of my palette to make room for that mixture. And one thing I always recommend is mix up big puddles of paint. Mix more paint than you think you need, because the worst thing is running out of paint too soon in your wash.
Yeah.
And I'm getting a little bit of cerulean blue in there as well. As always, you want to have some of your foreground colors in the background, and you want to have some of your background colors in the foreground. That way it's all nice and counterbalanced. And yeah, so we're getting started. Again, can't see it super well because it's cut off by the bottom of the frame. So I apologize about that. I promise in a minute we'll get to somewhere where we can see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as I'm adding some color, I switched brushes. I switched to a smaller brush, and anytime that you do that, you absorb quite a bit of paint into that new brush. So that's one potential pitfall you have to watch out for. If you switch brushes halfway, now you have to mix more paint to make up for the paint you just lost.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah. This is the part of the video where I'm painting, but you can't see what I'm doing.
We can imagine what you're doing.
Yeah, imagine it.
Looks dark.
I tried switching to the close-up view for this part, but this area of the painting was super out of focus.
Yeah.
So it didn't actually help at all. So, yeah. Well,
it happens from time to time.
Kaizen. The next one will be better.
Will be better. These kind of little things do not happen in our portrait course.
Still evangelizing.
Still plugging, man.
Course. Hey, it's pretty awesome. You know, we worked hard on it, and we feel quite confident in the value.
Yeah.
That it's gonna bring to people. So
yeah.
Definitely go check that out.
Well, and to speak more about the process of improvement, obviously when you're working in watercolor, no matter what your subject is, you're going to be using the same skills and techniques throughout every piece that you create, just sometimes differently and in a different order as well. So, yeah, you're going to learn a lot from this course here, and a lot of the same points will be covered in the portrait course, but you'll get to see how they're used in relation to painting a human.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, an infinitely more complex and difficult to paint subject.
Very, very true.
So one thing I just did, I want you guys to notice, right in the very lower left-hand corner, it's a little bit lighter in the background.
Mm-hmm.
I put a little bit more of my cerulean blue in that part of the mixture.
Gotcha.
Because again, I don't want this background to be just a flat black color.
You're trying to add some dimension to it?
Yeah, I want it to have some variety.
Some variety, yeah.
Yeah, some variation in the colors. It just looks more interesting that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't ever paint in those grasses back there or the sidewalk underneath. I don't need any of that detail.
Yeah.
I'm fine with a nice, soft, abstract background.
Yeah. That can sometimes be a pitfall as well, is focusing too much on the detail, and then the entire piece looks... Well, I don't know the best way to describe that, but you can...
Yeah, so you're think about it this way. The camera sees everything.
Yeah.
The camera it doesn't have a brain. It only knows how to capture every detail.
Mm-hmm.
Your eye selects what it looks at.
Yeah.
So in order to replicate that in our painting, what we want to do is actually not just think about what to put in.
Yeah.
We have to think about what to leave out.
Yeah.
Yep. So in the case of the background, that's pretty easy to say, okay, I'm just going to leave this blurry. You don't necessarily always want to do that because sometimes the background will be essential to your subject matter and it will be part of telling the story of the painting. Yeah. Especially landscapes, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, I just didn't feel like that grass added much.
Yeah.
So it was, I did not mourn its loss.
It definitely would have taken up more time and detracted from the flowers.
Mm-hmm. I suppose I could have made the grass blue like this.
Mm-hmm.
That might have been kind of neat. You know, been a little bit more of like the surreal world of blue grass. But
as long as you don't start playing any.
But I did not do that. There we go. Again with the lighter blue. You know, didn't quite succeed to the level that I wanted. I think the lighter blue ends up getting kind of polluted and more of a dark blue anyway, but that's okay. It's the thought that counts. And guys, when you're painting like this, do not leave any space between your background and the flowers. Do not leave halos around your objects. Paint right up to the pencil lines.
Okay.
This is another good reason to make your pencil lines dark. They're going to be absorbed by the paint anyway. Right? If you bring this dark edge right up to it, it's going to absorb that pencil line.
You won't even see it anymore.
Yeah, and this way you just know that it's nice and clean.
Yeah.
And I have to watch also my level of wetness in this background, because if I go too slow and I'm noodling away with those edges too much, it can actually start to dry, and then the previous stroke can dry before I put the next stroke on. And in that case,
disastrous.
Yeah, it can become streaky, and I think that does happen right up in that left-hand corner to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So it's not possible to truly prevent stuff like that. But it is helpful to start in one part or one corner, side, wherever. Just start in one place and work your way around in a circular motion.
Yeah.
Because that way you only have to focus on the leading edge of the paint.
Oh.
You don't have to work in multiple places simultaneously.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And hopefully you can all start to see this painting take shape here. See that nice contrast between the dark background and the light flowers. I think that's something that a lot of students struggle with, is getting enough depth of color and contrast in their watercolor paintings.
Yeah.
You know, of course, better materials, better quality paints will help with that, but don't be afraid to really make your mixtures thick and bold and almost, syrupy.
Ooh,
yeah, they don't have to be thin like watercolors usually are. They can be quite thick for something like this. So I want to preserve the lights in that background flower a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be soft and out of focus as well, so I just use some clean water to sort of run over that edge. And you all will see how that develops in a minute. So I don't know if you all saw that, but I just flicked my brush and a blot of paint flew onto my nice yellow petal.
Oh, it's infuriating.
Not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And I probably could have taken a dry paper towel and at least made it a little bit less bad at this point.
Yeah.
But I just decided to leave it and recognize that that kind of thing is a part of watercolor painting. And if you look carefully on the best paintings by the best pro watercolor painters in the world,
yep,
you will see spots like that sometimes. It's watercolor, man.
It happens.
It's dangerous, yeah. Sometimes that paint is going for a ride, whether you like it or not.
It really is at this stage that you start to see the flowers take form. Mm-hmm. That background really sets them, puts them in the setting.
Yeah, and this is getting into what we mentioned with negative painting.
Yeah.
So as you guys can see, at this point I'm creating the shape of the leaves by painting around them. And that sort of layering is definitely essential to watercolor technique. In fact, that's probably one of the first exercises that I have students do is negative painting.
Yeah.
Because it's painting backwards.
Painting backwards.
It's not your strokes that are the thing, it's the spaces between your strokes.
Okay.
And so much of watercolor is like that. It's counterintuitive, and you have to master it, and you have to get comfortable with it.
Cool.
And that is, one nice thing. We were ragging on oil painting earlier, but that's one nice thing about oil painting is, unlike with watercolor, if you have a leaf in oil, you just mix the green and you just paint the leaf.
Yeah.
And it's just there.
Yeah.
None of this tomfoolery. And it's funny, at this point I remember I was looking at that fuzzy, out of focus background flower up top.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was really going to put some more yellow into that, but I really like the way that looks.
It is very out of focus, but it does look good in the background.
It's kind of pleasing to the eye.
Yeah.
That nice soft. It's like this nebula.
Well, you did use your freedom to kind of decide where those shapes in the background are going to sit, because the reality is in the reference that flower that you've got there is much closer to the more in focus and larger flower.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a better use of space to balance it out that way and have those smaller out of focus flowers in the upper right hand and lower right hand corners.
Exactly. It creates a nice sort of triangular design.
Mm-hmm.
I like that too. I think a lot of students misunderstand composition when they're first learning it.
Okay.
Because they'll learn something like, oh, you want to have a cross in the design, like lines crossing over each other.
Yeah.
And then someone's like, oh, you could do like a triangular design. They're like, oh, okay. And then you talk about like, okay, here's the rule of thirds. Like you want things to be, a third of the way from the top and a third of the way from the side.
Yeah. And
I think some students will hear that and think, this is what I have to do with every painting.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Not true.
It's good to know those principles, and maybe you can find a way to incorporate them in your designs, and you'll know like, okay, this is a strong triangle. It's going to be a strong design.
Yeah.
But by no means are you beholden to it, and there are exceptions to every rule.
Yeah.
Good example of that is in filmmaking. Typically you'd use something like the rule of thirds. Have the focal point a little bit off center. But Wes Anderson is a director that we both like.
Yeah. And
he's famous for having shots that are perfectly symmetrical.
It's true, yeah.
And the focus is right in the center.
Him and Stanley Kubrick, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a thing. So in this case, I like the sort of flow of that large flower in the upper left cascading to the smaller flower in the
Mm-hmm.
lower left, and then balanced by the background flowers on the right.
Mm-hmm.
And I like it's almost a sort of circular
keeps you in the piece
motion.
too, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I think it's a strong design. But there's other ways that this could have been done.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure.
Well, that's why pulling from a reference, we talked about having a general sense of kind of an objective beauty in people and then in reference photos as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whatever jumped out to you about this specific reference photo, but obviously the elements in it are attractive enough to you as the artist to want to paint them, then to manipulate them and to adjust them in a way that is even more appealing. That right there is just kind of working off of your own education, right? You spent years working on this and seeing what works, what doesn't work. Now you're able to take it and almost do it without thinking.
Yeah, references are sort of garbage in, garbage out. If you are working from poor references that are out of focus or blurred or low resolution or don't have very good lighting,
yeah,
you're not going to be able to make the painting much better than that.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if you buy a good camera and learn how to use it and take clear, high-res, sharp in-focus pictures,
yeah,
and then better still, if you go to interesting places and shoot interesting things,
yeah. Well,
then,
you're doing everything you can to help yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, even with absolutely no skill in watercolor or in any other medium, for that matter, if you have set yourself up with all of the right things, the right materials, the right references, the right setting for painting and drawing, you're bound to do better than if you had not done those things in the first place,
And I know an artist, I won't call her out by name, but I know someone who takes pride in taking kind of poor references, and she composites them, and she uses her knowledge of light and skill in doing that to make something kind of cool out of them.
Yeah.
And she really takes pride in that, and that's all good. But what I really enjoy is taking a photo, like let's say I travel somewhere exotic and take a cool photo, and it's like, that's nice on its own.
Yeah.
Let me turn this into paint and
Yeah.
make it even better.
Yeah.
And I just find that to be really strong.
That for you is part of the craft.
It is, yeah. A lot of the creative work is done in the photography process.
Yeah. Well, because you could honestly just stop with the reference photo. That in itself is its own medium,
You could. I'm not really that good. No one's ever going to look at my photos and be like, that needs to go on the cover of National Geographic.
Exactly, yeah. I said exactly like I'm here. I'm like, yes, I would never say that.
You agree, my photos aren't that great.
No. Well, I mean, you didn't choose your own photo for this, but, never mind.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Touche. I don't take that many pictures of flowers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's another good point too. Is never ever, if you can avoid it, just use a photo that you got from Google.
Mm-hmm.
The exception is, we have another video on YouTube where I paint Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
At this point, it's fine.
Yeah.
Whatever photographer photographed Abraham Lincoln is most likely no longer with us.
Yeah. Well, that's actually something that I learned in school is how to actually search. Some of us are limited by the materials or the technology that we have to take good photos. Usually, if you've got a smartphone, you've got a pretty decent camera on you. Of course, if you have a DSLR camera, you're going to be way above the rest of the game. But with that being said, if you are searching for reference photos on the internet, there are some very specific search options you can use to find references that are, free for use and even resale at times. So you can do that by changing your search options. It can be helpful at times when you're looking for a specific reference that you can't take yourself. Like, for example, animals, especially wildlife. That's a great way to find them as well.
Or if you find a photo that you just really latch onto that isn't yours, you can contact the photographer and get their written permission. And I found that the vast majority of photographers are like, yeah, that sounds awesome. I'd love to have my work painted.
I don't think I've ever had anybody say no.
No, I don't think so either. So you can get permission. You can use stock photography that you buy. You can also get royalty-free photography. But your best bet is to take your own. Yep. And that way there's absolutely no question of it.
Mm-hmm.
I do also, there's certain legal rules around this. Like with a portrait, once you take a photograph, it is yours.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want with it. Same thing with making a painting. But in the case of the Udemy portrait course,
yes,
I took the photos of my model and I obviously got his permission to use them.
Yeah.
But then I just texted him again and sent him the picture and I said, are you okay with me using this for an online course that people can buy and will be seen by a lot of people? And he said yes.
Yeah. And
I just wanted to have that extra written reassurance that he was okay with that.
Yeah.
It's the courteous thing to do. It protects you legally. And I definitely would recommend that.
Yeah. Flowers cannot give this consent, so we didn't give them a form to fill out, but...
I didn't like the way that you worded that. Can you unsay that?
No, they can't. They cannot. They cannot agree to having the picture of them used in a course.
Yeah,
so.
They don't have to either. And also, I mean, technically, legally speaking, a lot of people don't realize this, but if you are in a public place, you can take a picture of a stranger and use it.
Yeah, that's true.
You do not need their permission. Most TV shows will get it, again, just as a matter of legal protection. They'll get like waivers from everybody. But if you take a selfie at Disney World and there's a bunch of people in the background of that shot, you don't need their permission to post that on Instagram.
Yeah.
So and certainly the government is not asking your permission to snap pictures of you in traffic.
Yeah. Or
wherever else. So if you're in a public place, you don't need people's permission. If you're, maybe in their home, you might. But generally speaking, you take a photo, it's yours. You can do what you want.
All right. Now, we've talked a little bit about this, but it might be good to kind of refresh. So you typically have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but 4 phases for your watercolor paintings. Can you go over those phases with us again?
Yeah, so phase 1 is the drawing, of course. That's how you begin. Phase 2 is always the underpainting. And this is very important for making all the colors work together and feel harmonious.
Yeah.
Instead of it feeling like your objects were cut and pasted out of a magazine into a collage. Third step is the longest and perhaps most important, and this is the modeling phase. So, best way I can describe that is that's the point where we're actually making the painting.
Yeah.
Right? This is where all of the shadows come to light and the forms are created, and where we go from it being sort of an abstract thing to an actual workable painting.
Yeah.
And usually that takes probably about 3/4 of the time. Everything from the end of the underpainting until now has been the modeling phase. And will continue to be the modeling phase for most of the rest of what we're doing here.
Okay.
And then the very end is just details and finishing touches. You know, and that's probably the least important. That's the part that you could skip. But on the other hand, you know, the overall composition of a piece is what draws the viewer in from across the room. The details are what keep them looking at it.
I like that.
Yeah, so I personally am a very detailed painter, and I like to really key that up right at the end. Little things like, you know, it could be the wood grain in wood, or the bark on a tree, or chipping paint.
Yeah, the value and the color there can tell the story, but those little details are what are going to add to it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they help tell the story. You know, if you paint someone who's got lots of, say, patches in their clothes, that tells a story about who they are and their dedication to conservation, repair rather than replacement. You know, stuff like that. You know, an obvious example also is the wrinkles in someone's face. Yeah, it tells a lot about them. So I like detail, and that, of course, goes at the very end. I do not recommend that you guys get bogged down in the detail too early. Definitely want to save that for last. And the first person that I heard sort of break down those 4 phases that way was Guan Weijing, the great artist of China, my favorite watercolorist. You can see his work if you go to the Ambleside Gallery in Greensboro, North Carolina. And
that's right. He actually has a piece left there, right?
He's got several pieces, yeah.
That's fantastic.
And so, you know, I had the privilege of seeing his demo live a couple of years ago and actually meeting him. And that's something that he mentioned is the 4 phases. Although he actually does his underpainting a little bit differently than I do. My underpainting is truly just a foundation and is not meant to really show through in the finished piece that much. Yeah. It just sort of influences the layers above it. Yeah. His underpainting and modeling are a little bit more merged together.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, because he'll do, like, say, you know, the shadow on the side of the nose and the temple and the cheek all in one wash with incredible results. His control is amazing. I do the same, but I like to have some reds and blues and yellows already there.
Yeah.
So.
Going back to our overhead view.
And it's starting to come together.
It is, yeah.
And so getting back to what we were talking about with knowing when to finish, this was a crossroads moment.
Yeah.
I remember when we were working on this.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Because at this point I looked at it and I thought, that looks pretty good.
Yeah.
That might just be good enough. And I stopped filming. You had to go, I remember. I stopped filming and I sort of contemplated for a while, went and got some dinner, came back.
Typically helps.
And I thought if I continue with adding more detail, which you all can see that I am, dialing it up, then I will have to increase the detail everywhere. Yeah. I'll have to essentially put a whole another layer on this painting to get it all dialed up equally, at least in the focal areas. And I debated it for a while, and in the end I decided that dedication to quality was important, and I didn't want to hold back from that, so I went ahead and finished this way. And I don't think that the piece would have suffered that much if I hadn't, but I do believe that the finished result was superior.
Well, I've heard you put it this way before. When you get to the detailed phase, or the details phase, something to the effect of, is this next step going to really improve this piece? Kind of deciding when to stop. Because the other idea that you've mentioned before is you can never truly be done with a piece. You can continue with it forever and ever and ever and ever. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of my things. You can never finish a piece. You can only get to a certain point and then decide to stop. You can always add more. But the truth is, after a certain point, the more that you add, the worse it looks. Yeah. So what I'm doing, just to clue you guys in, is I'm taking some of my cerulean blue in my background color. So cerulean blue, a little bit of Payne's gray. And I'm keeping it very thin and transparent, and I'm working it into the edges of the flowers to make the petals also seem thin and transparent. Yeah. In other words, I'm letting some more of that background color show through right at those edges. And I think that actually really helps enhance the delicate feeling of them.
Yeah.
In my opinion. This is sort of similar to how you would paint like a wine glass.
Yeah.
You would actually paint the background first.
Yep.
And then the glass and the wine over top of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, never say that there aren't tricks to this.
Because there are.
There are, yeah.
Many.
And that's why we exist, isn't it? Tips and tricks. Watercolorguru.org. Actually, I'm usually against trickery. A lot of, not just in like a broad like life sense.
I was like, oh, this is who he is.
Do your taxes, people. Be honest. Not just like that, but also in watercolor, I think a lot of what you see people teaching and learning is like, how to use wax with watercolor, how to use newspaper to create the illusion of leaves.
We do live in the tips and tricks age.
We do.
The 5-minute fix-its.
Or less, yeah.
Or less.
60-second video.
Yeah.
And all those things, using salt and alcohol in your paint to create different effects.
Mm-hmm.
By all means, learn those things.
Yeah.
But recognize that they are gimmicks.
Yes.
And doing something that will create the illusion of leaves and trees is not the same, and it is not as good as actually just learning how to paint well.
Exactly. No, I feel like we always continue to come back to the exact same point about how to improve your craft, and that being one of the most important things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, because those tips and tricks can get you somewhere, just not exactly where you want to go, and certainly not every time.
What it can help you do is learn to paint a representation or a symbol of an object, but not necessarily how to paint that object accurately.
That's true.
Yeah. And one thing that you touched on earlier that we didn't really go all that much into is the idea of learning how to keep things realistic versus keeping them sort of loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
And quick note about that. A lot of people are really quick to deride photorealism.
Yeah.
And say, oh, well, anybody can paint realistically. And the funny thing about that is, as you know, it's always the people who can't paint realistically that say that.
Yeah.
Because if they could, they would realize it's actually not that easy.
No, it's true. The reason, I've caught myself saying that before. Photorealism is admirable, and it is certainly impressive. There are reasons why some people feel like they don't need to paint that way, but certainly learning to paint realistically with an aim of perfect realism, that right there is something to strive for.
I would say, honestly, for any student, strive for photorealism in your learning process.
And settle for...
No. That's not what I was about to say.
I'm kidding.
Try to paint like me. Settle for painting like Max. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. What'd he say?
Actually, Max is a remarkable artist. That's part of why it's funny. You all don't know that, but he's good.
Okay.
But no, I was gonna say strive for photorealism, and if you master that, then you can always work your way backward.
You can always dial it down.
You can always dial it down and add in more of a style and add in some abstraction. But if you never achieve the ability to paint realistically, then you'll never know is like, oh, is this my style or am I just bad at this?
Yeah, exactly. No, it's true. Learning the fundamentals. Yes. Mastering the fundamentals, the key aspects of painting realistically will give you the freedom, eventually the freedom, to decide when you want to be loose with your painting, when you want to be more abstract. If you only paint in an abstract manner, and at one point you either are called upon to be more realistic, or you feel that desire to be more realistic. I've had that happen before too. Some pieces I'm working on, I think I want to be more abstract with this area. I want to be looser with it. I want it to kind of fade out of view. And then I realized later on that I need it to be more of the center of focus. If I don't have that ability to make it that way, I can never achieve that. I'll always be left wanting more. And that's why ultimately learning these skills is essential. It gives you the freedom.
And the principles and the knowledge and the skills that you'll gain in the pursuit of realism are invaluable. Because there's so much about even the physical properties of light that is so counterintuitive, but that once you learn, it's like, okay, this is so useful.
Yeah.
You know? And if you start with figure drawing, I know I keep going back to this. I'm sorry, I should focus on flowers here. But if you learn figure drawing, for instance, you may find, you know what, the human body doesn't really work the way that I thought it did.
Yeah.
Like, I'll ask students sometimes, like, okay, so where's the shoulder bone?
I blow people's minds by telling them there's 2 bones in their forearm.
Yeah, that is mind-blowing.
Many people don't know that.
They don't know that. And it's a trick question because a lot of people don't know that there is no shoulder bone.
Wait, there's no shoulder bone?
There's no shoulder bone. Your upper arm just attaches to the rest of your body. You know, via the scapula and the clavicle. But, you know, so you learn all this fascinating, useful information. And then if you say, you know what, I am going to be the next Picasso. And I'm just going to paint, you know, cubist art.
Yeah.
Great. More power to you. Picasso himself mastered realism at an academy before he ever painted, you know, abstractly like he did.
It's 100% true.
So, that's all I have to say about that.
So we are nearing the end here. Would you say that we are in the final touches, the details phase?
We're in the end game now. Yep, so you all may notice I'm taking those, you know, sort of cross contour lines, wrapping around the form of the petals that I made in the beginning. And now, especially you can see it really obviously in that lowest petal on the smaller flower, that I'm replicating that but with paint. And some of it I'm keeping kind of soft, some of it I'm letting a hard edge show through. But those striations are helping me increase the realistic texture of the flower.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully you've all enjoyed this video and everything's been explained clearly enough.
Yeah.
We've definitely let ourselves get derailed.
A few times.
A couple of times.
Yeah. I think it is important to acknowledge, though, real quickly that everything that we've discussed thus far, maybe not everything, but certainly, hopefully, most of it has played into the much bigger picture, which is not just this specific piece, but every piece to follow, you know?
Yeah, and it all plays into sort of the ethos of painting.
Mm-hmm.
What is your mindset as an artist in terms of pursuing perfection?
Yeah. What
is your overall process? How long should things take? And so I hope that you've all gotten some of that out of this too. And you know, to me, we've talked about the specific techniques here and there that I've used, but I don't think we necessarily needed to you know, narrate blow by blow exactly what's happening at a given moment.
Yeah.
Everybody can see that.
Ultimately,
it's on screen, and it's mostly repetitive, the same couple of techniques over and over again.
Yeah.
So. Or maybe all of this is useless, I don't know. That's a possibility too.
Well, if you made it this far, hopefully you do not feel that way.
And also, I mean, we've done a lot in speaking in the last few minutes trying to sell people on the idea of pursuing realism, but truth be told, this is a voluntary, you know, class to take. I think pretty much everyone that's watched it, that clicked on it, and probably anyone that has made it this far for sure, watched it because they said, you know what, I want to learn how to paint flowers realistically.
Yeah.
I can already paint so that it looks like a mess. Let me learn some more tight techniques.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is no trick to it, really. I mean, you said it yourself. You're not about the tricks and the quick tips. It's really just a life of dedication to craft and continuing to practice these skills over and over again.
Yeah, your ability to manipulate edges, like what I'm doing at this moment, like I said earlier, laying down a patch of shadow and then softening the edges of it, pulling it out.
Yeah.
Those motions are the things that you're going to do hundreds of thousands of times
exactly
over the course of your life. And the sooner that you can master them, the better off you'll be, for sure. And it's not a given either. It's not necessarily easy. If you lay down that patch of shadow and then your clean water is too much water, it's too wet,
Yeah.
you're going to get a watermark. It's going to push its way into the shadow.
Yeah.
If you use not enough water, you'll run out of water on your brush and get like a crinkly hard edge.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to get a sense of that rhythm of I'm washing my brush off in the water. I'm dabbing it on the paper towel to get off the excess. I'm laying it on the paper. I'm seeing what it does.
Yeah.
I'm back in the water. I'm back on the paper towel. I'm back on the paper.
Yeah.
And you do this over and over and over again. And I find pretty quickly for most students, they get the hang of it because it's just the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
When I used to work at the meat department at Lowe's Foods. This anecdote is a bit of a sidetrack.
All right, meat department.
And one of the things we had to do was there's this whole device, and anyone that's worked in a grocery store probably has seen this. There's this whole device where, you know, you put the meat in the little tray, the little like foam tray, and then you have to take a sheet of essentially saran wrap and wrap it over the top, and then wrap it under and over itself, and then there's an edge that's like a super hot metal edge.
Okay.
And it slices the plastic for you.
Oh, okay.
And then you pull it out with each hand, and you wrap it under itself, and then you put that on a hot plate to melt the bottom.
Okay.
And that's how you make it all like airtight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually, I'm kind of surprising myself. Like I remember the exact motion in my mind because I did it so many times. But that first like week that I worked there, I couldn't quite get the hang of it. You know, like I was wrapping it way too loose, and I just couldn't quite get it.
Yep.
And at a certain point, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do this like 1,000,000 times at this job.
Yeah.
I need to get the hang of this now.
Now.
So when it wasn't busy, I just took a few minutes and I took a bunch of empty trays that didn't have anything in them.
Yeah.
And I just wrapped like 100 of them.
Yeah.
And in like less than an hour, I'd got it down. And the next day, my boss was watching me. He's like, "Oh, you got that pretty fast."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Not really."
Yeah.
I just kept doing it until I got it.
Exactly.
So that's a long way of saying this, but it's kind of the same thing with watercolor.
Mm-hmm.
You want to keep practicing those fundamental skills again and again and again and again and again, and don't move on to something else until you've mastered it.
Yeah.
And, you know, honestly, an hour that you spend today mastering, let's just say, painting clouds.
Yeah.
You could even take like a bunch of scrap sheets of paper and paint like 10 cloudscapes in an hour.
Yeah.
That will serve you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well, and also find what you want to paint. That's going to improve your pieces also, because it's no longer an assignment, you know? If you really like to paint flowers, find good references of flowers, take good references of flowers, and begin painting them. You'll learn the needed techniques that'll apply to other things if you want to do them in the future, but at the same time, you're going to be perfecting your ability to do realistic or just flowers and watercolor.
And, you know, I agree, but also don't just do plants. Also branch out.
Oh. We got to cut that out.
We'll have to dig it up, I think. Weed it out of the video. Or should we just leave it there?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, also, you know, be diverse in your subject matter and your mediums. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this, but if you read any book about the business of being an artist, they'll tell you to find something to focus on.
Yeah.
And a good expression that I've heard is find your soup can, which is a reference to Andy Warhol, who made like, you know, hundreds of paintings of Campbell's soup cans.
Yeah.
And, you know, find your niche. Find what makes you recognizable. And I don't know, maybe this is why I'm not that successful as an artist. But I just rebel against that. Yeah. I like to paint a lot of different things. Yeah. In a lot of different ways. I like being sort of diverse and eclectic. To me, I take pleasure and pride in knowing how to do a lot of different things. And maybe that's fallacious on my part, but as far as the learning process goes, I would say don't be afraid to try new things.
Absolutely not.
Try a lot of different things.
Don't box yourself into a position you can't get out of, because eventually there will be something that you want to do, you want to try. And just like with painting realistically, if you've capped yourself at only being able to paint flowers, eventually you'll regret that decision. But Yeah, absolutely. Find whatever interests you. Learn to paint it well, and follow the same technique and skills that you pick up from other artists.
Mm-hmm. All right, Max, we're kind of getting to the end here. Anything you want to add or discuss before we close it out?
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of valuable points touched on in this, and there's a lot of other resources out there, not only on painting flowers like we have here, but also on painting people and landscapes and other different things. So yeah, don't be afraid to search for more information, and you can find it on watercolorguru.org.
Watercolorguru.org, the YouTube channel. Our most popular video is how to paint rainbows in watercolor.
It's short and sweet.
Turns out there's not really another video on the internet that shows that.
Yeah.
So some people have gotten a benefit out of it.
Yeah.
But just want to thank you all very sincerely for watching it.
Thank you.
If you have gotten this far, congratulations. You're amazing. This is that rigger brush that I mentioned for signatures. I like it. It's nice to write with. And quick signature tip. I used to use like a monogram for this, but problem is if you just write ARPJR.
Who is that?
Yeah, and in 1,000 years, if this painting still exists, no one's going to know who that was. So I've switched to actually writing out my whole name, Anthony Pfohl Jr., and then the date. I like to have that as well. And hopefully that'll make the pieces a little bit more long-lasting. And I've mixed cadmium yellow with some white watercolor, some gouache. That makes it thick enough to sit on the background. So, once again, thank you all, and we'll catch you in the next video.